Hey, this is Ian again, and this is episode 3 of my creating creative chaos podcast. I think I should come up with maybe a better name than that, so I can actually say it. And in this episode, I was actually going to start talking about how to get started in your creative project, and specifically how I got started with writing. So in my previous episodes, I talked about why I'm doing this podcast, and talked about that very important question is to, like, if you want to do something creative, why, think about why you want to do it, what you're trying to accomplish with it. And then talked a little bit about my why I decided to start writing after I retired, and gave you guys a story of that amazing committee that I was on, where I had to almost physically restrain myself from jumping out of the window at that meeting regularly. Thought about it. Okay, but this time let's actually start talking about how to get started with a project. And it's really simple. If you want to get started with a creative project, start it. And that may seem like a no-brainer thing, but I think one of the hardest things whenever you start anything is actually getting over that little inertia hump to start doing things. And everybody's got that little voice in your head that says, like, oh no, it's gonna suck, it's awful. Don't do it because you'll just fail and all that stuff. And, everybody's got that. And so you have to tell that voice, shut the hell up. I'm doing this regardless, and then just do it. So it takes a little bit of I don't know, arrogance, I suppose, but in a good way, to overcome that. So shut that voice up and just start it. And quite frankly, I think the easiest way to do this is to just set aside a certain chunk of time where you're going to do whatever your creative project is. Like in my case, I said, all right, for some damn reason during COVID, I started getting up at 5:30 in the morning, not really sure what that's all about. And if you would have asked me, like, even 3 or 4 years ago, if I would be getting up at 5 and be functional, I'd tell you were insane. But that's what it is. So I said, like, I'll get up, get my coffee, and for 2 hours, I'm going to sit at my computer and just type. And, even if I'm just sitting there staring at the screen, the fact that, which sometimes happens, the fact that I had that time set apart, and that from, those 2 hours, I was going to do nothing except either think about or type on my book. And that worked. Started typing, and honestly, the first it's going to be crap initially, because usually with things, the more you do them, the better you are. So don't expect, or maybe you're like some sort of Beethoven or Mozart genius and whatever you type in. I actually had a roommate like that. It was annoying as hell. He could just, like, start typing. It was all genius. But most of us aren't like that. So, just put something on paper, or on your computer, or if you're a musician, tinker with chords, or just start doing it, and set aside a time, or a space of time each day or weekly, or however you want to do it. I would suggest daily, and just devote it to whatever you're trying to do. Obviously, if you have an emergency, but get it in your head that that's going to be what you do for those 2 hours. And I think that's critical to getting started, is to actually get started. And then once you have some things out there, once you get in the habit of it, then you'll see it starts getting easier and easier, and then you can extend the time. So, like in my case, I started with those 2 hours right at the morning, and then once my brain kind of shifted over into writing mode, now I extend it, and I work on different projects. Honestly, hell, I work harder now, more hours, and I'm more productive now than I was when I was at the library. Just because there weren't as many meetings involved now. Go figure, right? So that is my biggest advice, and I think this comes out regularly amongst better known authors and things. But it works for any creative endeavor. Just get started. Set aside a certain amount of time that you're going to do it, and do it. Don't accept any excuses from yourself. Just go through and do it. And that's going to be pretty critical. And like I said, once you start doing that, it'll get easier and easier and easier as you go along. So as far as how to write specifically, because that's what I do, um, yeah, I've seen two schools of thought on this. There's one that says like you write an outline, you get it all in your head. Once you have the outline out, have it organized in your head, then you write it and you kind of fill in the outline. And I think probably J.K. Rowling is the most famous example of that because I believe that she's well known for writing outlines and then filling them in. The other school of thought is that you just kind of do it organically. You just start typing and do it. And I think Stephen King is probably the best known, most famous example of that, at least that I've heard. Um, and maybe most of us, maybe fall somewhere in between those. So for myself personally, I thought I was an outline person. So I would, you know, put together an outline, and I had an outline written up for actually the best example. I did for Reluctant Region. I wrote another book called Fallen Meridian where I had a really detailed outline. But then once I started writing, it turns out I'm not an outline person. I'm actually more of an organic person. And the reason I know that is for Fallen Meridian, I ended, had this main character, this space marshal guy, and he was going to be pretty important through the whole book. And then he ended up dying in chapter. Spoiler alert, he ended up being killed off in like chapter 2 or 3. And so what I found is it works best for me. I had a general idea, and then I just think about how logically things would proceed from there. So it's like, okay, this guy's in the space station. If I was in a space station, what would I do if I was in this situation? And I just keep typing, just kind of imagine that I'm in whatever the character's head is and how they would react to whatever's happening. And then kind of keep it in the back of my head what the overall situation is. Like, is the space station exploding? Is it being attacked, for example? And then just kind of keep that overarching scenario in my head and then just kind of write it, put myself in the head of whatever the character is and kind of imagine how I would react to it. And the story sort of flows from there. And like I said, that's just the way I do it. Feel free to find a way that works more comfortably for you and just do it. Just keep in mind that there are those two schools of thought, either outlining, getting the whole story in your head or just kind of going at it organically. And I think that's probably enough of a kick in the keister to start with, but I'm going to leave you guys with a little bit of a story about the first thing that I ever published when I was a young lad of, I believe it was 10 or lower. There was a magazine out there called Odyssey, which was a astronomy magazine geared towards people my age, kids. And I submitted a story to this thing. It's kind of an example of, didn't write an outline for it at all, which should have clued me in. And it was just a one-page thing where I wrote about, you guys remember the Voyager probe when it was sent out? They had that little platinum disc, with the pictures of the man and the woman and all the like songs and things like that. And so I imagined what would happen if like aliens found this probe and were trying to decipher, how they would actually look at this disc. So I described it. I remember specifically saying like, yeah, they were ugly and they had bushy knobs on top of their little square things, talking about heads. And then at the end of it, because I was kind of a dour child, I said like, but little did the aliens know that the humans had nuked themselves into oblivion thousands of years before. So I left it on that kind of depressing note. But what can I say? It was the 80s. We fully expected that to happen at any moment. So an example of my creative process as a young kid then. So like I said, got you guys started. A little bit of a just do it. Some nuts and bolts tricks on how to just do it. And I think I'll leave it there. And maybe next week we will talk about realism, I think is kind of what I was thinking about, and its utility specifically in science fiction and fantasy. So y'all have a good day, and I will see you next week.